Have you ever felt like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders? Like every step forward feels like you're walking through quicksand, and no matter how hard you try, you just can't seem to find that peace everyone keeps talking about? Well, if that sounds familiar, then this video might just change everything for you. Picture this. It's 3 in the morning, and you're lying in bed staring at the ceiling. Your mind is racing with tomorrow's deadlines, next month's bills, and that conversation you had last week that's still eating away at you. Sound familiar? You're not alone. Millions of people around the world are carrying burdens that feel impossible to bear, searching for rest that seems just out of reach. But what if I told you that over 2,000 years ago, someone made a promise that could transform how you handle every overwhelming moment in your life? What if there was an invitation so powerful, so life-changing, that it could shift your entire perspective on rest, peace, and what it means to truly find relief from life's heaviest burdens? In this video, I'm going to reveal the most profound promise ever made to weary souls like yours and mine. We're going to dive deep into words that have brought comfort to countless people throughout history. And I'll show you exactly how this ancient invitation applies to the modern struggles you're facing right now. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just what this promise means, but how you can personally experience the rest it offers. But first, let me share something that might surprise you. The person who made this incredible promise wasn't speaking to people who had it all together. He wasn't addressing the successful, the wealthy, or those who seem to have life figured out. Instead, this invitation was extended to the tired, the overwhelmed, the stressed, and the burdened. People just like you and me. The Son of Man is here to guide you through what might be the most important conversation about rest and peace you'll ever encounter. And trust me, this isn't about taking a vacation or getting more sleep, though those things are important too. This is about something far deeper, far more transformative than anything the world typically offers when we're feeling overwhelmed. So let's start with the foundation of this incredible promise. The words we're examining today come from Jesus Christ himself, recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. But before we dive into the specific text, I want you to understand the context, because context changes everything. Jesus was speaking to people who lived under tremendous pressure. They were dealing with religious leaders who had created endless rules and regulations that made life feel like an impossible test they could never pass. They were living under Roman occupation, facing economic hardship, and struggling with the same basic human challenges we face today: fear, anxiety, uncertainty about the future, relationship problems, and the constant feeling that they weren't measuring up. Into this environment of weariness and burden, Jesus spoke words that cut through all the noise and offered something completely different. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. These are nice words, but how do they actually help with the real pressures of modern life? How does an ancient promise address 21st century problems like job stress, financial pressure, relationship conflicts, health concerns, or that constant feeling of being behind on everything important? Here's where it gets fascinating. And this is what most people miss when they first encounter this passage. Jesus isn't just offering a temporary break from your problems. He's not suggesting you ignore your responsibilities or pretend your challenges don't exist. Instead, he's offering something far more profound. He's offering to fundamentally change how you carry the weight of life itself. Let's break down this promise piece by piece, because every word matters. First, notice who this invitation is for. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. This isn't selective. It's not for people who have already achieved some level of spiritual perfection or who have their lives completely together. It's for anyone who feels tired, overwhelmed, or weighed down by life's demands. The word weary here doesn't just mean physically tired. It refers to that deep exhaustion that comes from trying to meet expectations, solve problems, and handle responsibilities that feel too big for your shoulders. It's the weariness that sleep doesn't fix and vacations don't cure. It's soul-level fatigue that comes from carrying burdens you were never meant to carry alone. The word burdened is equally powerful. It describes being loaded down, like a pack animal carrying more weight than it can handle. Think about how that feels physically. When you're carrying something too heavy, every step becomes difficult. Your movement is restricted, and eventually, you might collapse under the weight. Jesus is speaking to people who feel emotionally, spiritually, and mentally overloaded. But here's what makes this invitation revolutionary. Jesus doesn't say, "Come to me and I'll remove all your problems." He doesn't promise to eliminate every challenge or make life suddenly easy. Instead, he offers something better. He offers to change how you carry what you must carry. This is where the concept of the yoke becomes crucial to understanding the depth of this promise. A yoke was a wooden frame that connected two animals, usually oxen, so they could work together to pull a heavy load. It was designed to distribute weight evenly and make the work manageable for both animals. When Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you," he's using imagery that his original audience would have understood immediately. He's saying, "Let me partner with you in carrying what needs to be carried. Let me share the load. Let me help you handle life's demands in a way that doesn't break you." This changes everything about how we approach our daily struggles. Instead of facing challenges alone, trying to solve every problem through willpower and determination, we're invited into partnership with someone who has infinite strength and perfect wisdom. But notice what Jesus says next. "Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart." This isn't just about getting help with heavy lifting. It's about learning a completely different approach to life from someone whose character is defined by gentleness and humility. Gentleness doesn't mean weakness. In the original language, this word describes strength under control, like a powerful horse that responds to the slightest touch of the reins. Jesus is saying that his strength is always exercised with perfect restraint and care. He's not harsh, demanding, or impatient with our struggles and failures. Humility means he doesn't lord his power over us or make us feel small in comparison to his greatness. Instead, he comes alongside us as a servant, ready to help, teach, and guide without condescension or pride. This is radically different from how we typically experience authority figures, or even how we treat ourselves when we're struggling. How often Do we beat ourselves up for not being strong enough, smart enough, or capable enough? How often do others make us feel inadequate when we're having difficulty handling life's pressures? Jesus offers something completely different. He offers partnership without judgment, help without condescension, and rest that comes not from escaping our responsibilities, but from carrying them differently. The promise continues, and you will find rest for your souls. This isn't just physical rest or even emotional relief, though it can include those things. This is rest at the deepest level of your being. It's the kind of peace that can exist even in the middle of difficult circumstances, because it's not dependent on everything in your life going perfectly. Soul rest is what happens when you stop trying to prove your worth through performance. It's what happens when you stop carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. It's what happens when you realize you don't have to figure everything out on your own or be strong enough to handle every challenge that comes your way. Finally, Jesus explains why this works. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This doesn't mean life becomes effortless when you accept his invitation. It means that when you're partnered with him, carrying life's legitimate responsibilities becomes manageable in a way it never was when you were trying to handle everything alone. The word easy here doesn't mean simple or without challenge. It means well-fitting, like a custom-made piece of clothing or a tool perfectly designed for its purpose. When you're yoked with Jesus, the challenges you face become opportunities for growth rather than crushing weights that threaten to destroy you. Now let me show you what this looks like in practical terms, because this isn't just beautiful theology. This is a life-changing reality that transforms how you navigate every single day. Think about the last time you felt completely overwhelmed. Maybe it was when you got that unexpected bill in the mail, or when your boss dumped another project on your desk, or when you realized how far behind you were on your goals. What did that feel like in your body? Your shoulders probably tensed up, your breathing got shallow, and you felt this crushing weight settle on your chest. That physical response happens because you're subconsciously trying to carry something alone that was never meant to be carried alone. Your nervous system is responding to a threat, but the threat isn't just the external circumstance. The real threat is the belief that you have to handle this by yourself, that your adequacy as a person depends on your ability to solve this problem perfectly. But what if, in that exact moment, you could remember this invitation? What if you could literally pause and say, Jesus, I'm feeling crushed by this. I accept your offer to share this burden with me. Show me how to carry this differently. Something remarkable happens when you make that shift. The external circumstance might not change immediately, but your relationship to that circumstance transforms completely. Instead of facing it with your limited resources, you're facing it with his unlimited ones. Instead of carrying it with your finite strength, you're carrying it with his infinite power. Let me give you a concrete example. Sarah, a single mother of two, was drowning in debt and working 2 jobs just to keep her family afloat. Every month felt like a race against financial disaster, and she was exhausted from trying to be everything to everyone while feeling like she was failing at everything that mattered. One night, after her kids were finally asleep and she was staring at a pile of unpaid bills, she remembered this promise. Instead of spiraling into panic or forcing herself to work even harder, she did something different. She acknowledged her complete inadequacy to solve this problem alone and invited Jesus to share the burden with her. The bills didn't magically disappear, but something else happened. She found herself thinking more clearly about practical solutions. Opportunities she hadn't noticed before became visible. Relationships that could provide support and encouragement seemed to emerge from nowhere. Most importantly, she discovered she could face each day without the crushing anxiety that had been her constant companion. This wasn't about denying reality or pretending everything was fine. It was about accessing resources beyond her own limited capacity. She was still working hard and making difficult decisions, but she wasn't doing it alone anymore. Here's what's crucial to understand about this promise. It's not a one-time transaction where you pray a prayer and suddenly life becomes effortless. It's an ongoing relationship where you learn to live differently. The yoke Jesus offers is something you wear throughout your day, not just during crisis moments. This means developing new habits of thinking and responding. When you feel that familiar tightness in your chest that signals overwhelm, instead of immediately jumping into problem-solving mode or panic mode, you pause. You acknowledge what you're feeling without judgment. You remember that you don't have to carry this alone. You invite divine partnership into the situation. At first, this might feel awkward or even unnatural. We're so accustomed to relying on ourselves, to believing that asking for help is a sign of weakness, that learning to live yoked with Jesus requires practice. But like any skill, it becomes more natural the more you do it. The beautiful thing about this promise is that it meets you exactly where you are. You don't have to clean up your life first or become a better person before you can accept this invitation. You don't have to understand everything about theology or have perfect faith. You just have to be honest about your need and willing to try a different approach. Some of you might be thinking, this sounds too good to be true. What's the catch? The only catch is that accepting this invitation requires admitting you can't handle everything on your own. For many of us, especially those who pride themselves on being strong and independent, this can feel like the hardest thing in the world. Our culture tells us that needing help is failure, that admitting weakness is shameful, that real strength means never showing vulnerability. But Jesus turns this completely upside down. He says that acknowledging your need is actually the beginning of true strength, because it opens you up to resources far greater than anything you could access alone. There's also this misconception that accepting help from Jesus means becoming passive or lazy, like you're supposed to just pray about your problems and then sit back, waiting for miracles. Nothing could be further from the truth. When you're yoked with Him, you often find yourself working harder and more effectively than ever before, but without the crushing weight of believing everything depends on your perfect performance. Think about those two oxen pulling together under a yoke. Both animals are working, both are contributing their strength, but the load is shared. Neither ox is trying to do all the work alone, and neither is sitting idle while the other does everything. It's a partnership where each contributes what they have while drawing on the strength of the other. This is exactly what Jesus is offering you. He's not asking you to stop working, stop trying, or stop taking responsibility for your life. He's inviting you to work, try, and take responsibility from a completely different foundation. Instead of operating from fear, anxiety, and the crushing pressure to get everything right, you're operating from a place of partnership, support, and unconditional love. The rest Jesus promises isn't the absence of work or challenge. It's the presence of peace in the middle of work and challenge. It's the deep knowledge that you're not alone, that you're not ultimately responsible for outcomes beyond your control, and that your worth isn't determined by your ability to handle everything perfectly. This kind of rest is available to you right now, in whatever situation you're facing. Whether you're dealing with a difficult relationship, a health crisis, financial pressure, career uncertainty, or just the general overwhelm of trying to keep up with modern life, this invitation stands. Come as you are, with all your burdens and weariness, and discover what it means to carry life's challenges in partnership with someone who has already overcome every obstacle you could ever face. The question isn't whether this promise is true or whether it works. The question is whether you're ready to try a different approach to the burdens you're carrying. Are you tired enough of struggling alone to accept an invitation to partnership? Are you weary enough of trying to prove your adequacy through perfect performance to rest in someone else's adequacy? AC. The transformation that happens when you truly accept this invitation goes deeper than most people initially realize. It doesn't just change how you handle big crises or major life decisions. It revolutionizes the small moments, the daily interactions, the routine pressures that actually make up the majority of your lived experience. Consider what happens when you're stuck in traffic and running late for an important meeting. Normally, your body would flood with stress hormones, your mind would race through worst-case scenarios, and you'd spend the entire time either fighting against reality or mentally rehearsing explanations for your tardiness. Your shoulders would creep up toward your ears, your jaw would clench, and that familiar knot would form in your stomach. But when you're living from this place of partnership, something entirely different becomes possible. You can acknowledge the situation without being consumed by it. You can feel the initial spike of stress without letting it dictate your entire emotional state for the next several hours. Instead of carrying the full weight of potential consequences alone, you're able to hold the situation more lightly. This doesn't mean becoming careless or irresponsible. It means recognizing the difference between what's actually within your control and what isn't. You're still going to call ahead if possible, still going to take whatever practical steps make sense, but you're not going to torture yourself over circumstances that are simply beyond your influence. The same principle applies to those moments when someone criticizes your work, when your teenager gives you attitude, when your spouse seems distant, or when you make a mistake that affects other people. Instead of immediately jumping into defensive mode or spiraling into shame, you have access to a different response pattern. You can pause, you can breathe, you can remember that your identity and worth aren't hanging in the balance of this particular moment. You can respond from a place of groundedness rather than reactivity, which almost always leads to better outcomes for everyone involved. This is what Jesus meant when he described his yoke as easy and his burden as light. He wasn't suggesting that life becomes problem-free, but that you develop a completely different relationship with whatever problems do arise. Problems become opportunities for growth rather than evidence of your inadequacy. Challenges become chances to experience divine partnership rather than tests you must pass alone. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like over time, because the cumulative effect is where the real magic happens. Imagine waking up each morning with a fundamental sense of okayness that doesn't depend on everything going according to plan that day. Picture facing your to-do list without that underlying current of anxiety about whether you'll be able to handle it all. Envision having difficult conversations without your nervous system treating them like life or death situations. Think about making decisions from a place of clarity and peace rather than fear and pressure. Consider what it would feel like to go to sleep at night without replaying every mistake from the day or worrying about everything that needs to happen tomorrow. This isn't fantasy. This is the practical outworking of learning to live yoked with someone whose strength never fails and whose love never wavers. But here's what's important to understand about this process. It's not instantaneous, and it's not automatic. Like developing any new skill, it requires intentional practice and patience with yourself as you learn. Think about learning to drive a car. At first, you had to consciously think about every single action. Check the mirrors, adjust the seat, fasten the seatbelt, start the engine, check the mirrors again, put it in drive, slowly release the brake. Your hands were probably gripping the steering wheel so tightly, your knuckles turned white, and you were hyper-aware of every other vehicle on the road. But eventually, driving became second nature. You could navigate familiar routes while having conversations, listening to music, or thinking about other things entirely. The actions became so integrated into your nervous system that they required minimal conscious attention. Learning to live from this place of partnership follows a similar pattern. At first, you have to deliberately remember to include Jesus in your thought processes, consciously choose to share your burdens, intentionally pause when you feel overwhelmed. It might feel awkward or forced initially because you're rewiring patterns of thinking and responding that have been automatic for years. But gradually, this new way of being becomes more natural. You find yourself automatically turning to prayer when stress levels start rising. You catch yourself earlier in the cycle of anxiety and overwhelm. You discover that your default response to challenges is partnership rather than panic. The key is starting small and being consistent rather than trying to transform everything at once. Pick one area of your life where you regularly feel overwhelmed. Maybe it's your morning routine. Maybe it's dealing with your finances. Maybe it's managing your work responsibilities. Begin practicing this partnership approach in that specific context when you wake up and immediately feel that familiar rush of everything you need to accomplish. Pause for just a moment. Take a breath. Acknowledge that you don't have to figure out how to handle all of it perfectly right now. Invite divine wisdom into your planning process. Ask for help in prioritizing what's truly important and releasing what isn't. As this becomes more natural in one area, you can gradually extend it to other parts of your life. The goal isn't perfection, but progress. You're not trying to never feel stressed or overwhelmed again. You're learning to move through stress and overwhelm differently, with access to resources beyond your own limited capacity. Some days, you'll remember to live from this place of partnership more than others. Some days, you'll catch yourself carrying burdens alone and be able to course correct quickly. Other days, you might not realize until evening that you've been operating from old patterns of self-reliance and anxiety. That's completely normal and expected. The invitation remains constant regardless of how well you think you're doing. It's not based on your performance or your ability to remember perfectly. It's based on unchanging love and unlimited availability. Every moment offers a fresh opportunity to return to this partnership, to remember that you don't have to carry life's weight alone. This is perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of this promise. It's not something you can lose through poor performance or forfeit through repeated failures. It's not contingent on your spiritual maturity or your ability to have enough faith. It's simply available, constantly, like gravity or oxygen or the sunrise. You can't earn your way into this rest through good behavior, and you can't disqualify yourself through bad behavior. You can only accept or reject the invitation, and even if you reject it today, it's still there tomorrow. The offer never expires, never gets withdrawn, never becomes unavailable due to your past mistakes or current struggles. This unconditional availability is what makes it possible to actually rest. If you had to maintain certain standards to keep access to this partnership, you'd spend all your energy trying to be good enough rather than actually experiencing the relief it offers. But because it's freely given and constantly available, you can stop performing and start receiving. Many people struggle with this concept because it challenges everything our achievement-oriented culture teaches about earning what we receive. We're conditioned to believe that good things come to those who work hard enough, try hard enough, and prove themselves worthy. The idea that something this valuable could be simply offered as a gift feels too good to be true. But that's exactly what makes this promise so powerful. It short-circuits the entire system of earning, proving, and performing that keeps so many people trapped in cycles of exhaustion and inadequacy. Instead of requiring you to become someone different before you can receive help, it meets you exactly where you are and provides what you need to become who you're meant to be. This doesn't encourage laziness or irresponsibility. Quite the opposite. When you're operating from a foundation of unconditional acceptance and unlimited support, you're actually freed up to take appropriate risks, pursue meaningful goals, and contribute your unique gifts to the world without the paralyzing fear of failure or rejection. Think about how differently you approach challenges when you know you're supported versus when you believe everything depends on your perfect performance. When you know someone has your back, you're more likely to try new things, speak up when something matters to you, and persist through difficulties. When you believe you're on your own, you tend to play it safe, avoid conflict, and give up more easily when things get hard. Jesus is offering to be that support system, that safety net, that source of strength when your own runs out. But unlike human support systems that can become unavailable, overwhelmed, or inconsistent, this support is infinite and unfailing. It's available at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep. It's available during that difficult meeting at work. It's available when you're stuck in traffic, arguing with your teenager, or facing a medical diagnosis that scares you. The practical implications of this are staggering when you really think about it. Every single situation that currently causes you stress or anxiety becomes an opportunity to experience divine partnership. Every relationship that feels difficult becomes a context for learning to love differently. Every challenge that seems too big for you to handle becomes a chance to discover what's possible when you're not trying to handle it alone. This is why the promise isn't just about getting through hard times or surviving crisis moments. It's about discovering a completely different way of being human, one that's characterized by peace instead of anxiety, confidence instead of insecurity, and love instead of fear. But here's what's crucial to understand about this transformation. It's not about becoming someone who never experiences negative emotions or difficult circumstances. It's about developing a different relationship with those experiences when they arise. You're not trying to avoid being human. You're learning to be human differently. Sadness, disappointment, anger, and fear are all normal parts of the human experience. The goal isn't to eliminate these emotions, but to move through them without being overwhelmed or controlled by them. When you're carrying life's challenges in partnership with Jesus, you can feel sad without falling into despair, experience disappointment without losing hope, feel angry without being consumed by rage, and acknowledge fear without being paralyzed by it. This emotional resilience is one of the most practical benefits of accepting this invitation. Instead of being at the mercy of your circumstances or your feelings, you develop what psychologists call distress tolerance. You can hold space for difficult emotions without needing to immediately fix them, avoid them, or be controlled by them. The rest Jesus promises includes rest from the exhausting work of trying to control your emotional life perfectly. You can feel what you feel without adding layers of judgment, shame, or panic about feeling it. You can be honest about your struggles without believing those struggles define your worth or determine your future. This honesty becomes a gateway to deeper connection, both with God and with other people. When you're not constantly trying to appear like you have everything together, you become more approachable, more relatable, and more able to offer genuine empathy to others who are struggling. The burden of maintaining a perfect image is incredibly heavy, and most people don't realize how much energy it requires until they set it down. When you stop trying to convince everyone, including yourself, that you're completely adequate for whatever life throws at you, you free up enormous amounts of mental and emotional resources for things that actually matter. This shift toward authenticity and vulnerability might feel risky at first, especially if you've built your identity around being the strong one, the one who has it all figured out, the one everyone else comes to for help. But what you discover is that people actually connect more deeply with your humanity than with your facade of perfection. The yoke Jesus offers includes partnership not just in carrying your burdens, but in being genuinely yourself without apology or pretense. You can acknowledge your limitations without shame, ask for help without feeling weak, and admit when you don't know something without feeling stupid. This kind of authentic living is incredibly restful because it eliminates the constant vigilance required to maintain false images. You don't have to remember what version of yourself you presented to different people or worry about being found out as less than perfect. You can simply be who you are, flaws and all, knowing that your worth doesn't depend on anyone else's approval or admiration. This freedom to be authentic extends into every relationship and interaction in your life. When you're no longer carrying the exhausting burden of trying to be perfect for everyone, you can show up more genuinely in your marriage, your friendships, your parenting, and your work relationships. You can disagree without being disagreeable, set boundaries without feeling guilty, and receive criticism without your entire sense of self crumbling. The ripple effects of this transformation are profound. Your children see a parent who models healthy responses to stress rather than constant anxiety. Your spouse experiences a partner who can be present during conflicts instead of defensive or withdrawn. Your co-workers encounter someone who can collaborate honestly rather than competing or people-pleasing out of insecurity. But perhaps most importantly, you begin to experience yourself differently. Instead of being your own harshest critic, constantly monitoring your performance and finding yourself lacking, you develop what feels almost like friendship with yourself. You can acknowledge mistakes without spiraling into self-hatred. You can recognize areas for growth without believing you're fundamentally flawed. This internal shift is where the deepest rest happens. The constant internal commentary that judges, criticizes, and worries begins to quiet down. That voice in your head that never seems satisfied, that always finds something else you should be doing better or differently, starts to lose its power over your daily experience. Imagine what it would feel like to go through an entire day without that running internal dialogue of inadequacy. Picture making decisions without second-guessing yourself into paralysis. Think about having conversations without mentally rehearsing what you should have said differently afterward. Consider facing new challenges without immediately cataloging all the ways you might fail. This isn't about developing an inflated ego or becoming careless about your impact on others. It's about operating from a secure foundation rather than a shaky one. When you know your worth isn't on the line in every interaction, you can focus your energy on actually contributing value rather than protecting your image. The security that comes from this partnership affects how you approach everything from career decisions to parenting choices to financial planning. Instead of making choices primarily based on fear of what might go wrong, you can make them based on wisdom about what might go right. Instead of avoiding opportunities because you might not be qualified enough, you can pursue them knowing that your adequacy comes from partnership rather than personal perfection. This shift in decision-making is particularly powerful because it breaks cycles of regret and second-guessing that keep so many people stuck. When you make choices from a place of partnership and wisdom, rather than fear and insecurity, you can move forward with confidence even when outcomes are uncertain. You start to understand that there's rarely one perfect choice in any situation, and that making a good decision and then fully committing to it is usually better than endlessly analyzing options in search of the impossible perfect solution. This doesn't mean becoming impulsive or careless, but it does mean trusting that you have access to wisdom beyond your own limited perspective. The practical applications of this truth show up in countless daily moments. When you're choosing between job opportunities, you can weigh the options thoughtfully without being paralyzed by fear of making the wrong choice. When you're navigating parenting decisions, You can consider what's best for your child without being crushed by the pressure to never make a mistake that might affect them negatively. When you're dealing with aging parents, difficult in-laws, or complex family dynamics, you can respond with love and wisdom rather than being controlled by guilt, obligation, or fear of conflict. You can set appropriate boundaries without feeling selfish, offer help without feeling resentful, and navigate disagreements without feeling personally attacked. The relational implications of living from this place of rest are perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this transformation. When you're not constantly worried about protecting yourself or proving yourself, you have so much more emotional and mental space available for actually loving other people well. You can listen to your spouse's concerns without immediately becoming defensive. You can be present with a friend who's struggling without feeling like you have to fix their problems or have all the answers. You can engage with difficult people without taking their behavior personally or feeling responsible for changing them. This shift towards secure, generous love is what happens when you stop trying to get your deepest needs met through human relationships and instead receive what you need most from an unlimited source. Other people stop being threats to your well-being or sources of validation for your worth, and they become opportunities for expressing the love that's flowing through you. The difference is subtle but profound. Instead of loving others because you need something from them, you love them because you have something to give. Instead of serving others to earn approval or avoid guilt, you serve them because generosity becomes natural when your own needs are truly met. This doesn't make you less invested in your relationships or less caring about other people's well-being. If anything, it makes you more present and more genuinely helpful because you're not constantly distracted by your own unmet needs or insecurities. Your marriage becomes a place where you can be fully known without fear of rejection. Your friendships become contexts for mutual encouragement rather than comparison or competition. Your parenting becomes an opportunity to model healthy living rather than a desperate attempt to avoid scarring your children through your own inadequacies. Even your most challenging relationships begin to shift when you're operating from this foundation. You can engage with critical family members without absorbing their disapproval as evidence of your worthlessness. You can work with difficult colleagues without their behavior derailing your entire day. You can interact with neighbors, service providers, or strangers with patience and kindness, even when they're having bad days. The cumulative effect of all these relational improvements is that your entire social world becomes more supportive and life-giving, not because everyone around you suddenly becomes perfect, but because you're no longer depending on everyone around you to be perfect in order for you to be okay. This creates space for people to be human in your presence, which paradoxically often brings out the best in them. When others don't feel the pressure of your neediness or the threat of your judgment, they can relax and be more authentic themselves. Relationships become places of mutual growth rather than mutual performance. The professional implications are equally significant. When you're not carrying the crushing weight of believing your career success determines your worth as a person, you can take appropriate risks, speak up when it matters, and navigate workplace politics without losing your integrity or your peace of mind. You can pursue opportunities that align with your values and strengths rather than just chasing whatever seems most impressive or lucrative. You can handle criticism from supervisors without it ruining your week. You can collaborate with colleagues without feeling threatened by their successes or diminished by their recognition. This doesn't mean becoming complacent or lowering your standards. Often, people discover they actually perform better professionally when they're not paralyzed by fear of failure or driven by desperate need for approval. Creativity flows more freely when you're not constantly censoring yourself. Leadership becomes more natural when you're not trying to prove yourself worthy of following. The financial implications are profound as well. When your sense of security comes from partnership with an unlimited source rather than from your bank account balance, you can make money decisions based on wisdom rather than fear. You can be generous without feeling threatened. You can plan for the future without being consumed by anxiety about worst-case scenarios. This doesn't mean becoming financially irresponsible or ignoring practical realities. It means approaching money management from a place of stewardship rather than survival mode. You can work diligently to provide for your family's needs without believing that your worth depends on your earning capacity. You can navigate economic uncertainty, unexpected expenses, or career transitions without falling into despair. You can make choices about spending, saving, and giving based on values and wisdom, rather than being controlled by fear of not having enough or shame about not earning enough. The health implications are equally remarkable. When you're not carrying chronic stress, anxiety, and the physical tension that comes from trying to control outcomes beyond your influence, your body can function more optimally. Sleep comes more easily when you're not lying awake, replaying the day's failures, or rehearsing tomorrow's challenges. Your immune system works better when it's not constantly flooded with stress hormones. Your digestion improves when you're not eating meals while mentally wrestling with problems. Your cardiovascular system benefits from the reduced chronic anxiety that so many people carry as their normal state. This doesn't mean you'll never get sick or that following Jesus is a guarantee of perfect physical health, but it does mean your body isn't constantly fighting against the effects of chronic stress and worry, which allows it to function more efficiently and recover more quickly when challenges do arise. The mental health benefits are perhaps the most immediately noticeable for many people. Depression often lifts when you're no longer carrying the impossible burden of trying to earn your worth through perfect performance. Anxiety decreases when you remember you don't have to figure everything out alone or control outcomes that are beyond your influence. Panic attacks become less frequent when you're not constantly anticipating disaster or believing that your adequacy is being tested in every situation. Racing thoughts slow down when you have a secure place to rest mentally, instead of constantly problem-solving, analyzing, and worrying. This isn't a substitute for professional mental health treatment when it's needed, but it's a foundation that makes all other interventions more effective. When you're operating from a place of fundamental security rather than fundamental threat, therapy works better, medication works better, and self-care practices actually feel nourishing rather than like additional items on your to-do list. The spiritual implications are the deepest and most transformative of all. When you're living in partnership with Jesus, prayer stops being something you have to remember to do and becomes as natural as breathing. You find yourself having ongoing conversations throughout the day, sharing concerns as they arise, expressing gratitude for good moments, asking for wisdom when decisions need to be made. This ongoing dialogue creates a sense of companionship that transforms even mundane activities. Grocery shopping, commuting to work, doing household chores, or running errands can become opportunities for connection rather than mindless tasks to get through as quickly as possible. You begin to notice divine presence in ordinary moments rather than only looking for it during designated spiritual activities. A beautiful sunset becomes a reminder of creative love. A stranger's kindness becomes evidence of grace operating in the world. Even difficult experiences become opportunities to experience supernatural strength and peace. This awareness of constant companionship is perhaps the most profound aspect of the rest Jesus offers. You're never truly alone, never completely on your own, never without access to wisdom, strength, and love that exceeds your own capacity. This knowledge becomes an anchor that holds steady, regardless of what storms may be raging in your external circumstances. The promise that began this entire conversation wasn't just about getting through hard times or surviving crisis moments. It was an invitation into a completely different way of being human, one characterized by partnership rather than isolation, security rather than anxiety, and love rather than fear. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it's not a destination you arrive at once and maintain perfectly forever. It's an ongoing process of learning to live from this place of partnership, of remembering who you're yoked with when life feels overwhelming, of returning to this foundation of rest when you realize you've been trying to carry everything alone again. The beautiful thing about this promise is that it meets you wherever you are in this process. Whether you're hearing about this possibility for the first time or you've been walking this path for years, the invitation remains the same. Come as you are, with whatever burdens you're carrying, whatever weariness you're experiencing, whatever overwhelm is currently dominating your thoughts. The yoke is still easy, the burden is still light, and the rest is still available. Not because you've earned it or because you've figured out how to do life perfectly, but because love itself has made a promise that will never be withdrawn, never expire, and never become unavailable due to your performance or lack thereof. This is the foundation upon which everything else is built. This is the security that makes all other growth possible. This is the rest that transforms not just how you handle crises, but how you experience every ordinary moment of every ordinary day. The question now becomes not whether this promise is real, but how you begin to walk in it today. Because knowing about this invitation intellectually is vastly different from experiencing its power in your actual daily life. The gap between understanding and transformation is where most people get stuck, and it's why so many remain carrying burdens they were never meant to bear alone. Let me walk you through what this looks like practically, because the shift from theoretical knowledge to lived experience happens through specific, intentional steps that anyone can take regardless of where they are spiritually or emotionally. First, you need to recognize the difference between your current default responses and what becomes possible when you're operating from partnership. Most of us have developed automatic reaction patterns that kick in whenever we feel threatened, overwhelmed, or challenged. These patterns were formed over years or even decades, and they feel as natural as breathing because we've practiced them so many times. When your phone buzzes with an urgent email from your boss, your nervous system immediately shifts into high alert. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, and your mind starts racing through worst-case scenarios before you've even read the message. This physiological response happens because your brain has learned to interpret unexpected communication as potential danger. But what if you could intercept that automatic response pattern before it takes over your entire nervous system? What if there was a moment of choice between the trigger and your reaction, where you could remember you're not facing whatever this is alone? This is where the practical application of partnership begins. Instead of immediately diving into problem-solving mode or panic mode, you create a small space for a different response. You take one conscious breath. You acknowledge what you're feeling without judgment. You remind yourself that whatever this email contains, you don't have to handle it with just your own resources. This might sound overly simple, but the power lies in consistency rather than complexity. Each time you choose this alternative response, you're literally rewiring your nervous system to operate from security rather than threat. You're training your brain to remember partnership instead of defaulting to isolation. The same principle applies to every trigger point in your daily experience. When your teenager rolls their eyes at something you've said, when your spouse seems distant, when you realize you've forgotten something important, when you get stuck in unexpected traffic, when your computer crashes right before a deadline, each of these moments becomes an opportunity to practice a different way of responding. The beautiful thing about this approach is that you don't have to wait for major life crises to begin experiencing the benefits of partnership. The small moments of daily stress actually become your training ground for developing the kind of trust and reliance that will sustain you when bigger challenges inevitably arise. Think about athletes who spend thousands of hours practicing basic skills so that when they're in high-pressure competition, those skills are so deeply ingrained they can execute them without conscious thought. You're developing spiritual and emotional muscle memory that allows you to access peace and wisdom even when your circumstances are chaotic. But here's what's crucial to understand about this process. You're not trying to eliminate all negative emotions or challenging circumstances from your life. You're learning to move through them differently. The goal isn't to become someone who never feels stressed, but someone who doesn't get overwhelmed by stress when it arises. When you're operating from this foundation of partnership, stress becomes information rather than emergency. It tells you something needs attention, but it doesn't convince you that disaster is imminent. Fear becomes a signal to seek wisdom rather than a reason to panic or freeze. Anger becomes energy for addressing injustice rather than fuel for destructive behavior. This emotional regulation isn't about suppression or denial. It's about having access to resources that allow you to feel fully while responding wisely. You can acknowledge disappointment without falling into despair. You can experience frustration without lashing out at whoever happens to be nearby. You can feel overwhelmed without believing you're inadequate to handle your responsibilities. The transformation happens gradually as you practice this different way of engaging with your emotional life. Instead of being at the mercy of your feelings, you develop the capacity to hold space for them while maintaining your connection to peace and wisdom. Emotions become part of your experience rather than the totality of your experience. This shift has profound implications for how you show up in relationships. When you're not being controlled by your emotional reactions, you can respond to others from a place of choice rather than compulsion. You can listen to criticism without immediately becoming defensive. You can witness someone else's pain without feeling responsible to fix it or guilty that you can't. You can engage in conflict without taking everything personally or believing that disagreement means rejection. You can set boundaries without feeling selfish. You can say no to requests that would overextend you without elaborate explanations or apologies. You can receive love without constantly questioning whether you deserve it. These relational changes often happen so gradually that you might not notice them at first. But over time, people begin responding to you differently because you're showing up differently. There's less tension in conversations because you're not bringing desperate neediness or defensive protection into every interaction. Your presence becomes more calming to others because you're operating from inner calm rather than inner chaos. Your responses become more thoughtful because you're not reacting from triggered emotions. Your love becomes more generous because it's flowing from fullness rather than emptiness. The workplace implications are equally significant. When you're not carrying the crushing weight of believing your worth depends on perfect professional performance, you can take appropriate risks, contribute authentically to team discussions, and handle feedback without it derailing your confidence for days or weeks. The invitation still stands today, just as powerful as when it was first spoken 2,000 years ago. Come to Him, all you who are weary and burdened, and you will find rest for your souls. Not temporary relief, but the kind of deep, lasting peace that transforms how you carry every challenge life brings your way. His yoke is easy, His burden is light, and His arms are open wide, ready to share whatever weight you've been trying to carry alone. And so, the story is complete, letting the words fade away now, and just resting in the gentle sound around you. With every exhale, feeling a little heavier, a little more deeply relaxed. There is nothing more you need to listen to, nothing more you need to do. It's safe now to let go, safe to drift away. My voice will soon be gone, leaving you only with peace, surrendering completely to sleep.